on YouTube. So all this that we've covered, college athletics forever, and then of course all the disruption of realignment and conferences, and then FSU and the ACC, et cetera. And there's a lot of things that have been written. Bill Farley is someone that he got my attention, and I've contacted him and say, hey, can you come on? And he has written quite a bit about Florida State, what they can do, what they might do, et cetera, what they do. And so he joins us now on 365 Sports. And Bill, I got to be honest with you up front. A lot of what you write is kind of like can confuse me and others, but that's why I wanted to have you on the show. First of all, thanks for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Why did this story become the one? Is this because this could be the end of conference realignment as we know it, or that you've jumped into this one?
Well, I said, first of all, it's in my professional interest. In my professional career, I worked on real estate joint ventures, economic development, 10 years in the public sector, and then 20 plus years in the private sector. And my last job in the public sector was negotiating a deal to keep the NBA Kings in Sacramento. And then my first jobs in the private sector, one was using private equity for a university project, and then also negotiating naming rights and the financing structure for a minor league baseball team. So this was in my wheelhouse as this topic came up. I'm an Oregon State grad. So back around August, I was working on another research project regarding a university expansion and their relationships with the community. So in August, all this stuff starts to hit the fan with realignment, and Oregon State obviously is left out. So I turned to that and I started looking at all the documents and making requests, and that kind of started my interest. And I'm still collecting documents on that. So that's what kind of piqued my interest. And as I wrote about this, the reaction and the interest in what I was writing was infinitely greater than my writing on the Legislative Reform Act of 1946 or any of the other topics that I occasionally cover. So, engagement helps my research, it helps my writing. So I just found this to be, I was getting a lot of feedback as I was working on this topic, and it's in my wheelhouse.
Well, Bill, you and I sit down with a couple of beers and start talking about the Legislative Reform Act of 1946. We can have a good time.
I'm all in.
But and you may not know this about me, our viewers do. I'm an FSU grad, so your article really was enlightening to me in that from the aspect of an alumni who's going to have to see this, it just feels like there was this big secret plan, and we'd like to know the details of it, because wherever the team is going to be, that's fine, but it seems pretty complicated. But the way you've laid it out, they have a pretty clear exit strategy and a plan that could work, kind of hinging on how the legality or the legal cases work out, right?
Right. They have. Oh, and I should say, my Uncle Joe is an FSU graduate. He's in his 90s, so he was there when they had leather helmets. So as I looked at this, I knew that there was this project Osceola that came out in Sportico. So I made a quick request. I make these public information requests all the time, and it usually takes 5 or 6 months. So I saw they had made a request. They got these documents. I read their story, and I thought, well, I'll just take a shot at saying, hey, give me what they got. And I got it back in a couple of days. And so I was able to go through and look at everything they were, looking at it from a joint venture structure. And because of my business background, I saw a lot of things that Sportico hadn't done. And I knew there was references to bond financing in those documents. So then I went onto the public website and I started seeing all these documents about bond financing. And taking that all together, taking the private equity piece, taking the bond financing that they've got that's in the public domain, and you really have a pretty comprehensive strategic plan. It hasn't been revealed that way, but they really are. They're covering all their bases. They've got everything lined up, and if they negotiate a very small exit fee, they are really positioned well with a lot of resources they've identified and strategies to really promote their athletic department in whatever conference they end up in.
Bill, when we first started hearing about the private equity side of things, it was very much a live golf kind of headline, like they're going to go grab the Saudis and the Saudis are going to run college football. Is there a simpler way for people like myself who don't know the ins and outs of the private equity side of things and why it's not that's being referred to? Is there a way you could kind of break down how private equity is intertwined in this story and why it's important, particularly to Florida State here?
Yeah, so I saw one internal email where this, the staff are saying, hey, kind of on the private equity side, there's a lot of guardrails in the public sector where you can't just take in a bunch of Saudi money and start, doing all these sorts of projects. It really will be very narrow. And I'll just give you a very simple example. And this is in their documents, and they actually have in the merchandising and the marketing side. It looks like they're going to take in a partner, and let's say their marketing business today is worth $1 million. It could be any number. Let's say it's worth $1 million. And a private marketing company comes in and say, okay, we'll buy 10% interest in this. We'll form a joint venture. We now own 10%. We're giving you $100,000. It's like Shark Tank. These people come on and say, I want $100,000 for 10% of my business, and they want those sharks to help them scale it up. So, the private venture partner's in for 10%. You've got this $1 million business. It's generating $100,000 a year currently. Then when the private partner adds their expertise to it, and they're getting paid for that. They're getting paid. There's a line item in the budget that they'll be getting $500,000 a year to manage this marketing piece. Their job is to start increasing that $100,000 a year revenue to say $200,000. Now, when it goes to $200,000, it'll be split 90-10, just as each has their own partnership interest. But when let's say they might say, well, if it goes over 200,000, that's more than we ever thought. So we're going to give the private partner, we're going to split it 50-50 after that. And that's called a kind of a waterfall where the first spurt in growth is split based on your ownership interest. And then the next level up, it starts to go towards the private equity partner that has the management expertise that's been lifting the revenue. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does. It absolutely does. What is the risk of the private equity, the person who's trying to help them raise this money?
Their only downside is if they don't lift the revenue, and they're getting a fee to manage it. If it stays constant, the money that they probably placed somebody else's money, that $100,000, and they told them, hey, you're going to be investing in a merchandising or marketing company, and we're going to get you a 20% return. If they don't get that, they're going to lose customers because their job is to lift companies' revenue and get a split of the profits. And I see three business lines, separate, distinct business lines where they'd have three different equity partners, because every equity partner generally has their own expertise. They have one medical office building equity partner that they announced a couple weeks ago that's going to do their $116 million football operation building. That joint venture could come in all sorts of permutations, but I won't go into that. And then the third one is they have a hotel development plan for next to their basketball arena. That could be a hotel equity partner that develops the hotel and agrees on splits and revenues. So it won't be just the Saudis, or a Saudi type, one giant group. It'll be strategic, and they'll have different partners that have expertise in different business lines.
So, I mean, that to me was the thing that kind of worried me, that sometimes when you turn yourself over to the big money, you don't have control of you anymore. They'll take out the parts of it that maybe people liked. I used talking to Smokey before the show, like Whataburger was always a Texas company, and then it got sold to this big conglomerate, and it feels like there's something that's like 5% different about it right now. It's the same, but it's different. How do they guard against that? And then also, how are the laws written that private equity can invest in a company or a school that is owned and run by a state school?
Well, in the case, let's take the football operations facility. I'll take your last question because I definitely know that one. So what they can do is they can lease the ground to the private equity partner. The private equity partner, so they'll be getting a ground lease payment every year. The private equity partner can build the building and then lease back a portion of that building to the university. And then in the rest of the building, they could, a lot of private equity companies are coming onto university campuses to kind of tie into research. They're called innovation districts. They're popping up everywhere. But what they do is they'll bring in tenants, sometimes new businesses, and they'll structure a rent deal with these new tenants that are kind of hooked in with the medical research of the university and say, we'll give you a low rent, we want a share of your company. So they'll basically have like an incubator or partnerships with a lot of small companies within their building, and then that's how they make extra money. But for the university, they're protected because they own the ground. The building is, say it's a 50-year lease for the building, for the ground lease. They'll eventually get that building back. And there's really, they've got all sorts of protections. They're going to have a long-term lease for their part of the building that they're using, and they're going to be pulling in cash from the private equity, and they don't subordinate, or they don't put, when the private equity company gets a loan for the building, they can't put the ground as part of the collateral. So the university is protected.
Bill, what's the difference between what you're explaining and what LIV is doing with the PIF?
So I haven't looked at that structure. That's the golf tour we're talking about, right?
Yes, sir.
So that to me is they're the ownership. They're I believe a complete owner, but I'm not really familiar how they're structured, and these things can be structured so many ways. The hotel joint venture could be completely different than the football operations facility and completely different than the merchandising. In all cases, it's private money taking in ownership, the public sector protecting and making sure they don't lose their land or their access to what they need for that building. And then hopefully they're getting a lift in their revenues based on that private equity partner's expertise.
So when you hear,
I think the LIV example would almost be like if you just turned the whole thing, just said we're going to license the whole athletic department out to somebody, and you guys, can lease our football stadium, you can lease our arena, you will hire all the athletes, you'll do all this. I think that would be like so far on the other side of the spectrum from what universities are typically involved in. I don't see the Florida State breaking ground with anything that hasn't been done already on university campuses.
All right, so the buyout appears to be like $120 million. If you look at the exit or the grant of rights, you see numbers that are $572 million, and of course that can be negotiated. What are your thoughts that the ACC would negotiate, like let's say even halfway to Florida State where they are right now? Is that even a possibility? Because if they do, their conference might just break apart.
Yeah, I think when Florida State, enters, kind of goes on the offense and files a lawsuit, they're obviously it's a one-on-one negotiation between them and the ACC at start. But very quickly it becomes a three-way negotiation because ESPN is going to start saying, hey, now let me look at this. Do I want to pull the trigger on and just tell the ACC that I'm not going to be extending that grant of rights past 2027? I think is the first stop they have. So now you've got a three-way negotiation. So my expectation is that ESPN, just like they played a role with the helping the Big 12 pull in 4 teams from the Pac-12, I think they're going to be a party to this negotiation, and it's going to drive the exit cost way down. So my expectation is it's going to come way down to where it's comfortable for Florida State to get out. Whether it helps the other schools get out, I'm not sure. That Florida State is to me, as I look at their financial situation, there can't be many other schools in the ACC that can match their financial strength. So, if they set it at $200 million, Florida State gets out, can everybody else foot that bill? When they turn over the $1 billion, 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 cushions in their sofa, they might not be finding gold bars. They might be finding loose change. So we'll see.
Bill, to that end, when it comes into the three-way negotiation, do you think that these court cases will ever actually see the inside of a courtroom, or is this just the first part of what will inevitably be a negotiation? Because I don't think all parties involved here really want everything out in the open.
No, sadly for me, because I want to see all those documents. Because I part of what I've done in other research projects is I make these public records requests so I can get everything and see what were these folks lying about, what were they misrepresenting, where were they telling the truth. I'm trying to help a community or fans in this case understand how these narratives, how accurate they were. So, unfortunately, I think for me, but good for Florida State, it's going to be settled because nobody wants discovery. We've seen snippets of stuff from the Pac-12, and it is horrible public relations for those university presidents who are all thinking, they're all rational actors. They're all thinking about their own careers. Commissioners are thinking about their careers. Nobody wants that type of exposure, those emails coming out.
Speaking of the Pac-12, the Pac-2 with Oregon State, Washington State, which is close to your heart, what are your overall thoughts of what's happened and what will happen with those two?
Well, I was asked that question the other day on a program where I just talked about Oregon State, and I was kind of stumped, even though I'm immersed in this and I think about it all the time. But you have to think about employment. You have to think about what's the future of employment wages for football players. What's the future of NIL? What's the future of this Super League that's going to take a lot of the resources away from the media companies or redirect it to concentrate at the top? When I see all of that, I think Oregon State, Washington State will be part of a West Coast football league. Probably predominantly the Mountain West, which is good football. I've gone to a lot of Fresno State, Reno, Las Vegas. There's a lot of good football, and there will always be good football because there's only so many 4 and 5 stars, and there's plenty of 3 stars to fill rosters. So I think Oregon State will have good football. I don't see them joining to a fractured ACC. I think they're going to be forming a good, solid West Coast program.
Yeah, it's a mess. How much of your day is spent right now trying to break the code for Florida State and the ACC?
Well, I got through the documents. I think I picked through everything that I could. I think it's real. I see their financial plan and their resources are pretty much set. They've got a plan to raise some revenue in their ticketing, to bring in concerts. They've got a plan to add revenue to their operations. They've got great borrowing capacity. They've been borrowing at 3% and 4% for the university system there for parking garages and student housing. So they're going to get great interest rates. They're going to have a lot of borrowing capacity. So I think they've got the money. So I'm starting to get past that. I don't see much more I can add. What I'm thinking about next, looking at while I wait for other documents, is kind of a future index to say, given all these factors that are facing all of college football teams, NIL, employee wages, media contracts, it's going to look, I think, a lot like professional sports in terms of relationships with communities needing to pitch in for renovations, states needing to pitch in. And I'm starting to think, well, what states, what football schools are going to have all the dynamic, all the pieces where they can compete at the highest levels? Because I think about an Arkansas and a Mississippi and some of the schools that are in big conferences now, but maybe are not in resource-rich communities. How are they going to survive? How is their fan base going to support them when they're kind of perpetually 3-10 or so, or 3 or 9 in these super leagues? So I think I've been thinking, and this also started with the Pac-12 gave us a stratification from top to bottom. Here are your top schools and here are your bottom schools.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of neatly slotted them into dollar values. And now you add on, well, can they afford NIL? Can they afford employee salaries? They're broke, so maybe they drop down a couple more rungs and they're going to have a difficult time in the future. So that's what I'm thinking about now is how do you kind of construct a futures index for football teams, given all these dynamics that are facing us.
My last question for you: if the momentum eventually is obvious for Florida State, how soon will North Carolina, Clemson, and others get the hell out of there? Will it be like even before the ink is dry?
I would think if they've got a wink and a nod, like Oregon and Washington, had a wink and a nod from the Big Ten. And I know everybody, even Oregon State, was talking to the ACC and the Big 12. Everybody was talking before the final bust. So those teams are talking. If they've got the opening, they file immediately and they get out because I think those schools probably have the staying power to compete at the top level, and the other ones, really just have to think about whether they want to invest that much money. And again, every university is different. Arizona needs football to drive application. Oregon needs football to drive applications. UCLA does not need football to drive applications. Every university's got their own kind of combination of what they get out of football and what they can put into football. So the ones you mentioned seem to be ones that would be good to go up, and everybody else, you have to look at them individually.
Bill, I'm glad I reached out to you, man. You're doing a hell of a job for a lot of people. I just mentioned it. I'm going to put it on my Twitter feed that they have not read you or have not subscribed to what you do. They need to. We appreciate it. I'm so glad we're able to get you on the show to help make sense of otherwise a pretty complicated situation.
Okay, I hope I didn't add any confusion.
Oh, no.
No.
Quite the opposite.
It helped quite a bit. Thank you. Bill Farley, Substack at Bill Farley, PhD. His background of how he got into this and all that, and I'm really glad we got him on. Good stuff.
I'd sign up for a class he taught.